How we doing? How we doing? This is Destination Denver, Colorado, and today, after living here for a year or two, what are the people who moved here saying about Denver? Let's hear, starting right now. All right, this is Destination Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jimmy Everson. Listen, if you're interested in learning all the ins and outs, pros and cons to moving to the Denver metro or Front Range area, then this is the channel for you. So that subscribe button and notification icon you see on your screen, make sure you click on that as I'm dropping new videos for you each and every week. And as much as I try to be a little informative here on camera, I'm also a licensed mortgage broker covering the entire state of Colorado and team with some of the metro area's most talented realtors. And we're helping people move here each and every day. So the number and email you see, know that I'm always the person, answer your phone calls, answer your texts, answer your emails. There, winning if you need me. Now that we're done with that fun-filled stuff, let's get to what we're here for, and that is, what are the people who actually moved here saying about Denver? All right, so I have to admit, I had a lot of fun with this one. This was the first time that I was calling people who had moved here, and these were people who both bought homes and people who decided to rent homes. And as we had this conversation, I noticed a trend. Depending on how positive or negative their experience had been, came down to a couple key factors, among others. First, where did they come from? Were they coming from a high-cost area, a San Francisco, a Seattle, a New York? Were they coming from a place like the Midwest, maybe coming up from Texas where things might have been more affordable where they were? And the second, after you look past cost, were they doing the things that they thought that they would really enjoy doing once they got here? So the type of people who move to Colorado and think they're going to be in the mountains all the time, or they think they're going to be at the parks, did those things line up? Are they actually enjoying the things in Denver and in Colorado that they thought they would? And the closer those two things aligned, their affordability lined up to where they expected, and the things that they enjoyed doing lined up, their reactions were positive, and obviously the farther apart those two were, the negative. So for this one, did a lot of phone interviews, sit down coffee, some happy hours, and really wrote down some of the comments that people made. And the one that I enjoyed the most was the idea of how pleasant and how joyful outdoor activities are. Whether you're getting into the Rocky Mountains for a hike, whether you're on Cherry Creek trails, the idea of just how much you want to get outdoors. And the caveat to that was also how accessible so many of these outdoor activities were. What surprised me about that statement was that it came from not just people, when we look at Denver, a lot of times we split it in half. You have your west side of town, your east side of town. And the east side of town can have a longer drive to get into the foothills, to get into the mountains, to get into some of the hiking. But it didn't seem to matter where people were in the city, relatively speaking. If they enjoyed getting to the mountains, or if they enjoyed trails, if that was their thing and they did it often, that drive did not matter. That wasn't the negative feedback. They still thought there was better access to these areas than they had experienced where they came from. The second thing, and this was no surprise, was that the weather is relatively pleasant, that there's a lot of blue sky days, there's a lot of sunny days, and there's a lot of reasons to get outside. And the feedback was that they expected that from videos that they had watched, not just mine, but that even in the winter time, or during seasons in which you expect the weather to be a bit worse, there were still plenty of days where they want to get outside and experience this nature we have. The third one no surprise and one kind of surprising. The beer scene being on point, that was, I don't think, a surprise. Colorado is huge when it comes to breweries, Denver being a big key of that. But the feedback, talking to folks about how many breweries in their communities, especially again, if that was their thing, how much they really enjoyed that. The idea of the breweries plus the food trucks. Now, what may have surprised me, because Denver gets a knock for its food, and some people will come here, especially the food snobs, will say that Denver's not on point. The feedback was very positive as far as food. People, I think, again, with the exception of folks who were coming from, restaurant hubs. If you're coming here from a New York, especially New York City, you're not going to be, I don't think, impressed by Denver's food necessarily. But for the most part, they were pleased with the different options they had for restaurants. They were pleased with the progress that had been seen in restaurants, and they were and they were excited about the progress since the pandemic, because a lot of these folks, everybody I talked to, was in the last 12 to 24 to maybe 36 months of moving here. A lot of them had seen the tail end of the pandemic, certain restaurants closing down. To see some of that bounce back has been very positive. The fourth, and I will say this was kind of hit or miss, was the positive vibe of the people here and the welcoming. Now, I think I have to admit, this is kind of one of those things where I hear how warm and positive the vibe is. I mean, use the term vibe, sorry folks, here in Denver, and how welcoming we can be. And then I do hear the polar opposite. I hear how isolated it can feel. I hear how lonely it can be. I hear how difficult it can be to get into groups. And I can't tell, and this isn't, necessarily people that it's just the introverts who are having a hard time, or the extroverts are making all the friends. And it's not just people who moved here alone having a tough time. Sometimes it's couples. So I am trying to narrow that down. Like, what is it? Is it a region of town? Is it an age? Is it an industry? But, as many people say that it's positive and welcome, I do get feedback that it's a little isolated and unwelcoming. That's a tough one, and I wish I had a better answer for you. The fifth one, and this made me feel really good, is people talking about how many festivals, culture events, and different things within different communities there are. Now, in my videos, I try to talk about things that are happening in different communities. I live in Lakewood. We have a lot of festivities next to us in Belmar Park. There was one just this weekend. But you go to areas, Parker, Broomfield, Wheat Ridge has things, Arvada. But, talking to people who have really embraced that, and not just in their community. I was talking to this great couple that moved here last year who live in Arvada, and they don't just enjoy Arvada's events. They get down to Littleton. They get over to Parker Days. They get around to multiple communities' Halloween events because they're big Halloween people. And so as much as I think that Denver and the metro area has great culture and a lot of events, that reminder of how much people can really get involved in their community if they want to was very positive. And sixth, as far as positives, and again, this could be polarizing, was how positive the job market and economic opportunity for people had been. Now, I've helped a lot of people move here who were coming already with a job. Maybe they were remote, it was a transfer, something of that nature. But just as many have moved here looking for opportunity. And so in talking to them, the feedback was overall very positive. Certainly some struggles, some conversations about months going by looking for the right job, or starting in one position before finding another and moving on. But overall, it feels like there was, and I use the term opportunity, there were a lot of positive mentions of the job market and of the economy, far more so, at least in the people I questioned, far more so than negative reactions. Now, it can't be all sunshine and rainbows. Certainly got some negative feedback as well. The number one negative feedback I got, could be a big deal or not, depending on your situation, was people were really frustrated with traffic. And I know sometimes we talk about traffic, and if it's a big city, there's gonna be traffic, whatever. There was still the talk of, man, there are times where I didn't expect to have a 45-minute to an hour-long drive to get from point A to point B. One of the things I always find humorous on this channel is people love to debate how long drive times are. Politics, but we'll dodge that. But that conversation of how long drive times take. I think people start to see that when you get into certain pockets of Denver, for instance, if you're on I-25, our north-south highway, if you're around I-70, our east-west highway, that crossing, things can get pretty backed up. If you're down near the Denver Tech Center, in Greenwood Village, things can get pretty backed up. And as you're on I-25 between those two, as you're going through the city, the I-25 kind of wraps around Denver in between the city and Mile High Stadium or Sports Authority Field, whatever they call it now, traffic always tends to get backed up. So it was talking to people about their drive and hearing some of those frustrations, especially if they were I-25, especially if they were in certain areas of Aurora where things can get backed up on service roads. It just kind of depended. If there was a positive to it, there were a handful of people who talked about how pleasant they enjoyed, depending on traffic, but how much they enjoyed their drive home. That tended to be the people kind of in the outskirts, more into the suburbs. Now, not to add to the negative, but we're going to add to the negative. The additional feedback on traffic was also the idea that Denver is sprawling out. You know, people aren't necessarily targeting downtown Denver. And anytime we talk about these videos and I say Denver, please understand we're talking about a metro area that extends out to multiple suburbs and tens and tens and tens of miles out. I'm not going to say hundreds of miles out, but tens of miles out. So within that metro, as people spread out, you start to see that infrastructure. You start to see service roads. What I mean by service, roads with 40 to 45 mile per hour speed limits. You start to see those get pretty congested. You start to see 3 and 4 lane roads packed with cars. So that sprawl in that infrastructure stretch is being seen even by people who haven't been here very long. I can already hear the natives watching this video and telling me, I'm gonna get all the comments, it's their fault, they're the reason. That's not really how Colorado would talk, but every time I complain, I get a really bad New York accent, I don't know what to tell you. Second, and again, this was really big depending on where people came from, but it was the cost of housing, whether that was buying a house or renting. I think there were a lot of people who were surprised at how much, if they were going to rent, how much rent was for the things they wanted, especially if they were looking for a house as opposed to maybe an apartment or a townhome. If they're looking for a house, those could be costly, whether you're renting or buying. But the overall cost, and I can't stress it enough, it really depended on where they came from. If I was talking to somebody from Silicon Valley in California, they're talking about, man, this place, it's like going back 20, 30 years in time. Whereas when I talk to someone who moved here from Canton, Ohio, man, it's a stretch for them to get used to Denver prices. The third really big thing that came up, and there's no denying it, and that is the homeless issue in Denver. And, you know, again, when I talk about Denver, I'm talking about the metro area, I'm talking about the outskirts. So there was a period of time where I could look you in the eye and I could say that you might see a handful of homeless people downtown. And that was somewhat common. And again, I could say that's pretty common in any major city or even smaller towns for that matter. Because of affordability issues, because of different causes. We'll talk about immigration here in a second. You're seeing an increase in homeless, and it's not just in Denver. You're starting to see some sprawl out into the suburbs. There are areas of Lakewood, the suburb I live in, where if I drive around, I'm going to see people on the corners, panhandling, on the streets, and it's a difficult situation. You can tell that the city doesn't really know what to do. We have had, as I said, I was going to mention, we've had a lot of immigrants bust into Denver, most coming up from Texas, or originally from South and Central America, but these immigrants have been here for a while, and when you pull up to corners, you will see them out, trying to, they're washing windows or they're doing something to try to create some income. And it's a stressor on the community. There's no doubt about it. And the feedback on it is one of stress, of this is not what we expected when we moved here, and certainly not for the people who have already lived here, who have been here for decades and decades, generations, if you will, who are watching this. It's a significant problem, and it's one that the city of Denver and the communities around it, they don't have a solution for yet, and I don't know how close they are to finding one. The fourth comment I got, and no denying it, is air quality in Denver struggles. And there are days where you look outside and there's smog and it's nasty. And there's a lot of areas of Colorado that are having that problem. And that pollution, a lot of it can come from forest fires. You'll see if we have fires in Canada, if we have fires in California, and then certainly if we have fires in our own mountains, it will get smoky here, and it will remain smoky for days upon days upon days. Now, that's not to say that our air quality is just gorgeous when it's not, when something is not on fire, but that was one of the most common complaints. And this was coming from the very same people, a lot of times, who enjoyed the outdoors. Like, they loved, man, we can get up to these mountains and we can get on these hikes. We just wish the air quality was better, and I feel that. And then the fifth and last real negative that I heard was a lack of diversity, and that was really, that was specific to regions that people lived in. And when I say regions, like certain parts of towns, certain neighborhoods, and it wasn't an aspect of, hey, we don't feel welcome here. It was more of a, I wish there were more I wish there were more people like us, or I wish there was just more people not like us. And that was, honestly, it was very interesting to hear because it came from people who wanted more people not like them as much as it was people wanting people more like them, if that makes sense. But some interesting feedback there. The sixth thing, and I didn't have a specific quote for it, but crime, has been on the rise in Denver, and it had been pretty significant, or has been pretty significant. We're rated as, Colorado is rated as one of the more dangerous states in the union. And so I asked people about that. And again, it really depended on where they lived. I didn't talk to a single person who said, I don't feel safe. Now, again, that's just an emotion. That's not fact. That's just an emotion. It's just an opinion that these people had. Now, I talked to plenty of people who said, I don't think we'd go out for a walk with our kids at night. We worry about what's going on at this house down the street. We get a lot, there was a lot of that feedback. And there was a lot of talk about being aware of surroundings. For the most part, as far as crime went, the conversation was about awareness, paying attention to surroundings, but I didn't get a lot of, I'm afraid, I'm not comfortable, I don't want to be here. Now, again, I can't stress enough, when we talk about crime specifically, that's something that people want to do their due diligence. You're going to have your own conversations on. That was the feedback I got on a very important topic, because if you look at Denver statistically, crime is not a positive when it comes to Denver. And then there were just some statements, and some of these tie into things I've said earlier, but just some kind of general statements. The idea that the cost of living in Denver really came down to where you were from. And people acknowledged that. Whether it was people coming from a higher cost area or lower cost area, they acknowledged that they understood to an extent that was going to happen. I do think that there were people who were coming from lower cost areas who were more prepared for it. And they talked about that. They said, we knew our rent was going to be way higher. We knew our mortgage payment was going to be higher. We knew going out to a restaurant was going to be much higher. We were ready for it. And then there were others who said, we thought we knew. We thought we were ready for this higher rent payment, and it's been a hard adjustment. So certainly that preparation time as far as your expenses was crucial. Another was of how many people talked about the blend of city and nature that Denver has, and how, even though, again, I think they thought that, they thought they knew that as they moved out here, the idea, hearing that you can get from Denver to the mountains or the mountains to Denver in 30 minutes or less, depending on where you're coming from, it just didn't seem real to them. And so, and some people, most really enjoy that. Some have said it's almost too much. Like, we just, it gives us too many things to do, so we don't end up doing anything, which is interesting, and I can kind of relate to that for whatever reason. And a couple other things, some folks talked about marijuana and how the culture of marijuana, like, there's some people who are very much into it and some people who are very much not. Now, I'll say there wasn't a lot of negative feedback as far as marijuana, and not that I expected it to. I don't think you walk around Denver and you're just surrounded by the scent. There were some people who talked about it being frustrating for them, that they didn't like when they would go to a concert and smell it, or walking down 16th Street or whatever. There was some negative feedback. For the most part, people said, if other people were into it, it didn't really bother them. And then there were some who flat out, that's part of the reason why they moved here. They enjoy the culture, if you will. You can see how naive and unknowing I am as far as this, but that was one of the pieces of feedback. I didn't get a lot of, oh my God, marijuana is legal here feedback. It was either positive or pretty neutral. The fourth, and I really enjoyed this, we're dog friendly, and we talk about it. Again, I know you've seen videos, and every positive pro and con video about Denver is going to talk about how dog friendly we were. But I had people saying, like, we heard and we thought Denver was dog friendly, but it's dog crazy. Not just with dog parks everywhere, with people walking their dogs, with people making doggy dates. There's a lot of people here who don't have kids or don't want kids, so instead they have multiple dogs. They go out in their little herd, pull daddy like a chariot on a leash. Just one of my favorite lines. So hearing that not only had they heard that Denver was dog friendly, but they've witnessed it. They've seen it. They've been in the Whole Foods when the person comes through with their dog service animal, of course, and gets their lettuce. I mean, we just love our animals out here. And a couple last ones that I really felt good about, and that was the arts and music scene in Denver. And not just, I think there's a lot of times, and there was a period of time where if you had asked me about art and music in Denver, I would say, well, I mean, we have a museum, we have the Art Museum, and then we've got Red Rocks, which is an incredible concert venue. But there are so many music venues in Denver and the metro area. There's music indoor, outdoor, smaller, intimate, large scale, you name it. There's music everywhere. And then when it comes to art, I mean, Denver has really gotten artsy. For the longest time, we have Santa Fe, one of our major streets down in Denver, had an art walk, but you're seeing it all over the place. You're seeing these different art exhibits open. I was just talking to some folks over in Park Hill, a great, very popular neighborhood in Denver. And as soon as they were done with that conversation, they were going down to this little art gallery at this exhibition that weekend. So you're seeing that, you're hearing that. Art and music, a huge positive here in Denver, and people are enjoying it. And the last was just one that a friend said, someone who we weren't friends a couple years ago, but now we are. He was talking about the backdrop of the mountains in so many of the things that we do, that it's just always there. And it's always this reminder that we can get up there and we can explore. And I have to tell you, as a native of Colorado, we love throwing that out, as someone who grew up here, and even for people who have lived here for multiple years, I think the mountains, we just get used to them. We stop thinking about how majestic and gorgeous this natural phenomenon is in front of us, and to remember that it is a reminder of this beauty and of the fact that Colorado is a big state and there's a lot of beautiful things in it, a lot of mountain ranges, cliffs and canyons, and that backdrop that we enjoy, whether you're closer to it or farther away, it's pretty hard to miss the mountains, and to see that and be reminded of what you can explore, pretty incredible. So overall, in having conversations with these people, it was great to hear some of the positives. It was real to hear some of the negatives. And some of them are things that we know, we were always aware of or have been aware of, but to hear it from the person. And granted, listen, I understand there's a massive difference between the people who grew up here and who view Denver and the state of Colorado a certain way, and people who have recently lived here. And there's going to be friction between those two. Coloradoans love to blame California, so sorry, California, it's your fault. But to see that, I will say my emotion, my feeling after these conversations was that Colorado, and Denver for that matter, is still in a good place. Are there some significant challenges? Absolutely. You can't talk about homeless and crime and affordability without recognizing that. But overall, I have yet to talk to a single person who truly regretted moving here. There were people who said, we wish it was better, we wish we were taking advantage of certain things, we wish certain things had worked differently, but no one going, oh my God, why did I do this? For the most part, it was Colorado is what we wanted, it's what we expected, and we are enjoying it. For what it's worth, there's a reason I keep making these videos, and it's not because I think Denver or Colorado are on the downslide. But hey, this is a perfect opportunity for you to call, text, email, comment, drive times, native talk, all the things you want, knowing that I'm always the person to answer those phone calls, answering those texts, answering those emails, answering those comments. This is Destination Denver, Colorado. I am your host, Jimmy Everett. That was What Are the People Who Moved Here Saying About Denver? Until I see you next time, peace.